by the Adirondack Experience Museum and the Adirondack Diversity Initiative. This series is a discussion on the Black experience in the Adirondacks, and tonight we're going to explore the founding of this organization and get to know the all-white individuals who started it. Now, that may sound strange to talk with a panel of all-white people in a series about the Black experience in the Adirondacks, but that's a story we need to unpack this evening. I'm Kim Irland, Dean of Student Life and Diversity Officer at North Country Community College, and I am honored and privileged to be here with the four founders of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, Paul Hay, Willie Janeway, Pete Nelson, and Martha Swan. All right, before I further introduce our panelists, we begin our discussion, there's some housekeeping for our audience this evening. If you would like to submit a question during this program, please submit it through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You'll notice you will be only be able to see your own questions. For questions that are not addressed this evening, the Adirondack Diversity Initiative will add more information to its website, along with a link to a recording of this evening's discussion on our YouTube channel. If you are having any trouble during this live stream, please feel free to post a question to the Q&A and a staff person will provide guidance. Also, please note the recording of this session posted to our YouTube channel will have closed captioning available. Now let me tell you a little bit more about each of our panelists. Paul Hay is Associate Director of the Adirondack Ecological Center and the Northern Forest Institute at SUNY ESF's Newcomb campus. He has spent the majority of his life in the Adirondacks and lives with his wife and daughters in Newcomb. Willie Janeway is Executive Director of the Adirondack Council, leading the largest environmental organization in the Adirondacks focused on the park. Willie is also former Director of the State DEC Hudson Valley and Catskills region during the Governors Spitzer, Patterson, and Cuomo administrations, and worked for the Nature Conservancy and ABK. Willie lives in Keene with his wife, Mary. Pete Nelson has also been involved in diversity issues as an activist and teacher since the 1970s, including social justice programs in his hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, tenants' rights and inner city housing in Chicago, and equity in education in Madison, Wisconsin. Pete is a mathematics instructor and member of the College Diversity Task Force at North Country Community College. Martha Swan is the founder and executive director of the Freedom Education and Human Rights Project, John Brown Lives. She is also a Spanish teacher. Before moving to the Adirondacks in 1997, places she has lived and worked that inform what she brings to ADI include small social justice nonprofits and the Board of Education in New York City, farm worker rights organizations in Arizona, Florida, and Arkansas, and interfaith peace and solidarity efforts in war-torn Nicaragua. All right. So, panelists, I am confident our audience would love to know why each of you is doing this work. Could you tell us about your personal and professional passions for this work and how they intersect?
Is there an order in which you'd like us to respond?
That is up to you, Paul. Go ahead.
Martha, I'll defer to you if you'd like to go first.
Okay. Is it just chopping up on my end, or is it getting frozen?
No, I think.
Well, I'll just chime in. What do I bring personally to this work? I bring work to the work of diversity and inclusion from a racial justice and human rights commitment. Importance of studying our history, reckoning with our history, particularly means not to ensure that we don't repeat the mistakes. That's not how history works, but so that we can understand how we got here, how we got to this deeply entrenched in for the purposes of this conversation, structural racism. I also bring an awareness and appreciation that racial justice, there's been a burning racial justice issue in the North Country for the better part of 40 years, and that has an intersection between, well, although it's a diversity that's often left out of the picture and left out of the conversations. So I'll close there and let others chime in.
Well, to not let the science go on too long, I'll jump in. Passion is the right word, Kim. This is a passion, and it's challenging, it's exciting, it's important. I really would say there are three reasons why it's important to me and why I got involved. One is simply from my perspective, it's the right thing to do. When you talk to people of color in the town I live in now in Keene who grew up with experiences of people locking their car doors when they walk down the street, you know this is the right thing to do. When the odds that a person who's missing and reported as missing in the North Country is many times as likely to be gay as straight, then this is the right thing to do. When you teach in the prison system and 90% of your students are Black here in the North Country, it's the right thing to do. It's important to have that ethical piece of it. That's one. The second is that it's in the interest of our communities. The more inclusive and welcoming we are, the broader our expression of how we can relate to the rest of the world is, the more opportunities we have to grow and thrive. In New York, which will be a majority minority in a few years, we're talking about doubling the potential market for people who could enjoy and appreciate this place. I want our communities to thrive, and I think that's important. The third reason is the welfare of the park as a whole. It exists at the pleasure of the people of the state of New York. As I said, the state will be majority minority soon. If this park isn't relevant, if this park doesn't matter in all those dimensions to people of every kind, the park won't be protected. And this is an irreplaceable jewel, an internationally significant jewel. Those three things come together. Ultimately, they're all of a piece. That's why I'm here.
So for me, the intersection of my personal and professional passions, what brought me to this was as an individual who works in education and outreach for the College of Environmental Science and Forestry. I was hosting school groups here. We bring in groups from all over New York State. And what we were seeing was a significant lack of diversity in the types of schools that were able to travel here. And one of my earliest partners in the Adirondacks was Martha Swan. And she opened my eyes to a lot of things that I had not previously been aware of. And through collaborating with her, we were invited to join something called the Children of Nature Network. And if you're not familiar with Richard Louve's book, Last Child in the Woods, it was through that work, Martha and I had extended an invitation for him to come speak. And it was through that invitation that we were invited to join the Children of Nature Network. And that national work really began to open up for me the disparity in who accesses places like the Adirondacks. And I came home from the very first conference we had and realized that the things I was already struggling with as an educator and the schools we were trying to attract and the audiences we were trying to reach was just a microcosm here in the Adirondacks of what is a national, what is a global disparity. And so that really was a driver for me in beginning to look broader than just the Adirondacks and looking to where we as a place need to connect to communities in order to make sure the Adirondacks, as Pete was just mentioning, are a place that are enjoyed by all New York State citizens. And it starts in school, it starts in grade school, it starts in childhood. And so that is what brought me to be involved in all of these questions of diversity, of race, gender, ethnicity, religious beliefs, abilities, all of these different, this wide spectrum of diversity.
Kim, Willie Janeway here. Thank you so much for pulling us together. First, on behalf of Pete, Martha, and Paul, I am designated to thank all of you and David and the museum and all our other partners. We all really appreciate you pulling us together. And as you said at the outset, Kim, it is a little odd gathering together 4 white founders coming to the Adirondacks from a relatively position of extraordinary opportunity, but bound together with our love for this incredible national treasure, and all seeing that that treasure wasn't being equally made available to all people, regardless of race, gender. And the Adirondack Park is the largest park in the contiguous United States, and it belongs to all New Yorkers. It is an incredible resource. It's more important today with the crises we're facing than it's ever been before, and it should be a resource that all people can benefit. And we looked around 2013, 2014 and realized those who had the opportunity to really benefit from the park seemed to be a certain slice, and the park will seem to be struggling with being as open and inclusive to everybody. So thank you for pulling us together. Thank you to all who have connected with us. I know each of us, as part of original core founders, are only just part of a small network, and we quickly discovered that many others had been working on this issue, like Martha, for years before we came in as newbies. And the speed with which the network of people and organizations came together, that first conference that Paul mentioned in 2014, I believe, and when we were driving to it and saw a Confederate flag flying, and I heard last night from a friend from down in Virginia saying they see more Confederate flags and signs of racism here in the Adirondacks, with the racist graffiti issue in Saranac Lake and the threats on the director of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative. At times, I'm tempted to think that as a group, we and others have done some good things over the last few years. We've secured, as the Diversity Initiative, support from Governor Cuomo, support from the State Department of Environmental Conservation, funding, hiring Nikki, and then at least I feel somewhat embarrassed that we have accomplished so little. And I hope our dialogue pivots to what can we do going forward. There was so much more to do to make sure this world-class resource of wilderness and communities is protected and available for all. So thank you to my fellow panelists, and thank you to the organizers and sponsors, but thank you mostly to those who have dialed in, who can be part of a dialogue about what we're going to do to address the crises that we're facing. Thank you. Kim, back to you.
All right. Yeah, thank you for sharing what brought you together to start the ADI. I'm curious, given the moment that we're living in right now that you referenced, Willie, given the national and local conversations, the momentum, and the racist incidents that are surfacing, could you tell us in what ways has ADI evolved from its founding? Is the work still about diversity or more about equity? What's next and why the urgency? Martha, would you like to start?
This is new to me, this Zoom panel business. I think that the mission, the urgency, the tenor, the urgent relevance of this initiative, I think it has changed from the very beginning. We were, and correct me if I'm wrong, fellow panelists, but the idea at the beginning was to be welcoming and inclusive. But I think that what we have seen is that being welcoming and inclusive isn't always just or safe. So we have this urgency of safety and I think solidarity that we need to be working in and acknowledging in all of our communities, and in our hearts. That we all have deep work to do, to reckon with biases and both personal and structural that we might not even be aware of. So a kind of reckoning, truth-telling, and action to create safety, create welcome, but also to create a more just, in my view, a more just and equitable society.
Yes, the equitable part is important. In truth, it's always been urgent. It's been urgent for centuries. And certainly, from my perspective, with a more urban background, that urgency has been something that I have seen or experienced as a white person with privilege. it's possible to be discomfited and even outraged by the difficulties in our society with the structures that create a gradient like this that makes it very hard for some people. For example, when I moved here from Madison, Wisconsin, very progressive place, the graduation rate for African American males age 18 was a little over 50%. The incarceration rate for African American males of 18 years old was a little over 50%. That's an outrage. So our work has evolved for sure. These are unprecedented times. The level of consciousness about this stuff is at an all-time high in my adult life, certainly in the country. And at first, we had a conversation. We started a conversation. That conversation was what brought the four of us, and as Willie said, many other allies together. But the conversation, as important as it was a little bit to the choir. And I think a key word for me and a key word in this work is discomfort. That was comfortable. Now things, we need to be uncomfortable. We need to address very difficult things in a way that shows more than words and more than expressing the right ideas. Nikki Hilton Patterson, who's the director of the Diversity Initiative and a friend of mine, allies. And what she means by that is that people need to band together, whether comfortable or not, to do hard work more than talk. And because of the fact that we now have funding, we have a great director, and we have all this momentum, we can do that work. That's what the future looks like to me. It's not as comfortable, it's more effective in helping to create the kind of change and the kind of social dialogue that does make a difference.
So I think in the same way that each of us represent different personal passions for why we came, and the organizations we work for have different interests and missions, I think each of us sees different ways in which the ADI as an entity has evolved since its founding. As Pete mentioned or alluded to, the history of this is that a lot of us, Willie mentioned this a moment ago, a lot of us were working independently on issues of diversity in the park. But we were working on them on professional levels, and we were working on them as individuals. And as Pete alluded to just a moment ago, the initial conversation that brought us together was an article that Pete wrote assessing, what is the conversation that's not happening in the park? And he put it out there front and center in the public domain. So what had been something that we were all working on professionally, Pete put out in the public domain. And that was that we're ignoring diversity. No one's talking about it. And so that actually was a catalyst in which we were all able to come together and begin to work together, and not work independently, but to begin to work collectively and to be out in public with our work. So the initial, and Martha alluded to this too, the initial work we were doing was just connecting, just building the infrastructure of all of us knowing who was doing what and where, and what our different interests were, and how we were all active in different aspects of diversity. But where we've evolved to now is we've built enough capacity that now we're able to be active. We're providing programs. Nikki has been developing programs and trainings, and we are out in the communities, and we're building that structure now. We're building the breadth of programs that we're going to be bringing forward. We're actually now able to put capacity to not just connecting people, but to try to change what is happening in our communities and to address what's happening to our communities. That's the evolution I see.
Oh, you talk about the capacity we built, and Kim, you ask about, given the moment we're in now, the urgency of this. When the Adirondack Diversity Initiative came together, it pulled together some of the long-standing efforts like Martha, John Brown Lives, and some of the other efforts. And the first phase for a couple of years was really about elevating the dialogue, and that brought out some ugly response. But even more powerfully, it brought in the Adirondack Foundation, the Adirondack Mountain Club, the Wild Center, the museum, the Adirondack Experience, and more others than I can possibly remember. And after several years, Pete mentioned talking to the choir, we realized there is a choir there, but we're mostly white. And I want to thank some folks who came to one of our conferences, and I remember them basically reading me the Riot Act. Anyone who knows Alice Green, Brenda Valentine, Aaron Mayer, remember Brother Yusuf, African Americans with connections to the Adirondacks who came in and told us, what the heck are you white guys and Martha doing here? Let us tell you. And they told us about what we really needed to do. And we put together a business plan. We raised money. The state stepped up and allowed us to be at this new spot. We really, as Paul said, now have the capacity to reach out, but the times have suddenly changed on us. This series that tonight is a part of is about the Black experience in the Adirondacks. And today, that experience is not the experience it should be. And Black Lives Matter. Right now, that is the crisis. This group has always been very sensitive to all forms of differences, and that the park should be welcoming to all, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, sexual identity, economic status, religion, whether you've got a connection to the park that goes back 4 generations or 10 generations, you're from one country or another. We want to be welcoming and inclusive for all. No time is more urgent than right now, though, so I appreciate that we have this opportunity to elevate this. And I think back on Brother Yusuf, who really challenged us to drive for real changes. And I'm hoping going forward here, I think, Kim, you're going to sort of shift more into that forward-looking portion of this. Thank you.
Yes, nice transition, Willie. Thank you, everyone, for those thoughts. And I do have one last question before we turn our attention over to the questions from our attendees that are starting to come in.
There's some good ones.
Again, if anyone does have a question, please add it to the Q&A, and we will address that in a moment. I'd like to hear what you think ADI has enabled you to accomplish collectively that you couldn't accomplish individually. I think you've started to touch on this already, but any other thoughts that any of you have? Go ahead, Willie.
Very quickly, a lot of people in the state knew about the Adirondacks but didn't know a lot about it. Only by working together with us and many others, Jonathan Brown, his wife, were we able to go to Albany. And Adirondack Council's advocated for a lot of things. And you go to Albany and you get some support and you get some opposition. In 30, 40 years of advocacy, the Adirondack Council, I'm not sure we have ever so quickly had everyone go, wow, the Adirondacks, diversity, absolutely. So, and it didn't matter whether it was a Republican Senate or a Democrat at Assembly, Governor Cuomo, okay, there's times when there's tension between these parties. Everyone came together faster than I've seen on any other issue. The chair of the Parks Department, of the Parks Committee in the Senate from the Bronx, and Governor Cuomo, upstate representatives. That was something we were able to do together that none of us could have done individually. And the governor's statement just, 24 hours ago about the incident in Saranac Lake does show how far we've come. It unfortunately also shows how far we still have to go. Thank you for letting me jump in, fellow panelists. Back to you, Kim.
I'd love to jump in too. I can hardly stand it, that question. Listen, I've lived in wonderful places before, fascinating places, New York City, Chicago, Madison, as I said, very progressive. I have never experienced the sense of community and the sense of purpose that I've experienced here in the Adirondacks. And it's affirming. And what Willie talked about just now, about how fast this happened, is for me in part a reflection of the remarkable engagement of people in this park. And it's really important for me to say this next thing. Affirming doesn't mean everybody agrees. Affirming doesn't mean that we're all on the same bandwagon. There's a perception sometimes, and sometimes it's the fault of the way the word diversity is used and the way it's presented. There's a perception that this is all, everybody got to be on the same bandwagon, and everybody's got to be pulling the same direction. No, man, this is hard stuff. And I have to tell you that I've had remarkable conversations with people who don't necessarily understand why this is important or what we're doing or don't agree with some aspect of it, but engagement leads to a higher level of dialogue, a higher level of consciousness. I think this park is full of people who are engaged, and it's really important also because and I've lived it all my life as a visitor and now a resident, seen it. There are these divides within the park, class divides of the people's perception of who's interested in protecting the wilderness and who's not. These divides are pernicious, just as those kinds of divides and other divides over gender, over race, are pernicious. And they're not as true as people would like to think. I've felt so affirmed by the way this has come together and by the way the dialogue, even with people that might have a very different view than mine, has engaged. And I think the progress that we've made, which I agree with Willie, I'm a little embarrassed that we haven't done more, but you know, the progress we have made and where we stand now is a testament to the fact that this is a remarkable place, not just naturally as a place of wilderness and nature, but a place of people who are ready to engage and love this park as much as I do.
Excellent. Well, Martha, do you have a comment? Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to jump in a little bit on that, and from the perspective and the experience that I also bring to this work as a teacher. And one of the things that I think is exciting and hopeful about this moment, and with ADI, with the cohesion and the strength and the visibility that it has now, I think working collectively and very strategically, we have an opportunity to have an impact on, Paul mentioned earlier, the importance of working with kids at a very young age, you know. So I think we have an opportunity of really working to try to ensure that students that come through our schools across the North Country, that they are exposed, especially, you know, in the very, you know, most predominantly white, homogeneous in so many ways communities, or at least on the surface, that students will have an opportunity, and teachers as well, to deeply engage with the world that we live in, and the world that they're going to live in. So I'm hoping that, and excited that that's one of the areas that ADI can bring to bear its collective power and reputation, with Nikki at the helm.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that when you ask what have we been able to do now with the existence of ADI that we could not do before, I think there's two very obvious examples. The first is that we're here together tonight having this conversation, and there are 92 participants. Actually, right now there's 89. A moment ago there was 92. We have a lecture series every summer. There's many people who have a lecture series every summer, and it's easy for people, we're in the midst of summer season, obviously, it's easy for people in the Adirondacks to come and join that. We're currently shut down under COVID, and we have 90 people online to have this conversation. That's a remarkable success. And again, I want to reiterate what Willie said about thanking the Adirondack Experience for hosting this. So one, we have a center of gravity around which people can come and now explore this issue. And not people who were exploring it before, but now that we have colleagues and partners, we have a stronger voice, we have an integrated voice, we can speak with one voice when we need to. And that leads exactly to the other thing. What's happened to Nikki in Saranac Lake has been happening. We have no idea how many explicit examples have happened, but we have enough anecdotal evidence to say it happens, excuse me for generalization, all the time. And it has been happening all the time for generations. Now we have a way to stand up and shine a light on that. And we have a way to bring people together who can stand up and stand against that. And so ADI, simply by existing, has created a center of gravity to push back and to push back against and to push forward towards positive change in our communities.
Excellent. I do have some really good questions from our attendees that I'd love to share with you guys. This first question, Willie, if you want to take the lead on answering. The question is, both the DEC and the APA, these two state agencies that manage and protect the Adirondack Park, have a stunning lack of diversity in their ranks. Do you think that this woeful lack of diversity on these two important state agencies contributes to the lack of diversity in opportunities for the public? And if so, to what end is ADI doing to address this problem?
Chris, thank you for that question. Thank you for your work, for those of us who know Chris is, to support diversity in the Adirondacks and funding. You're absolutely right, Chris, that is an issue. And personally, I would agree that the civil service system and the challenges of hiring have made it really hard, despite support at the top, Commissioner Basil Sagos, Terry at the Adirondack Park Agency. Without getting funding for new staff positions, it's been really hard for either agency to diversify as much as they want. And I don't want to criticize their efforts because they've been trying, but I am comfortable acknowledging that what I think they would acknowledge, they have fallen short of what they would like to do. Just as we at the Adirondack Council, as a large organization, we have some, but nowhere near the diversity we should have. And we find it hard, but that doesn't serve as an excuse. And that's one of the specific places that we all need to change the profiles we're looking for, our recruitment systems, and we need to change some of our civil service systems to make sure we do a better job of that. Thank you, Chris, for that question.
I'd like to add to that, and when I started out saying, what were the professional and personal intersections, obviously the outreach and education and working with school groups, but even is a driver. But I failed to mention that within our institution, as one of the foremost colleges in the United States dedicated to studying the environment, we're very closely connected with natural resource management. That's the DEC here in New York State, but we have individuals who go and work all over the United States. And so we recruit heavily individuals who are interested in science, interested in the outdoors, interested in natural resource management. And we know that it's an extremely challenging to identify, recruit, and retain students from traditionally underserved backgrounds into sciences. And so it's something that also is a driver for us. How do we excite students at a young age about science? How do we model for them that they can have a college career pursuing science and natural resource management, and that they can move from a college career into a professional career? And that ties into Chris's question and Willie's answer. We have partnered with the DEC. In fact, some of the earliest work I did in 2010 was with DEC support to create a Headwaters to Harbor Hudson River initiative to speak to people and bring them together about how we address issues of diversity and natural resource management organizations up and down the river throughout the watershed. So DEC has been a strong partner throughout, and they're aware of the challenges in identifying and recruitment, as we are as well at SUNY ESF. And it's something that we're, as Pete said, we're still struggling to address, but we're aware of it and working on it.
Yeah, let me just very briefly throw in that when Nikki Holton Patterson started as the director, really roughly at the beginning of this year, two of the very first groups that invited ADI in to begin a dialogue about this very difficult problem of the organizations themselves not representing diversity were the APA and the Department of Environmental Conservation. They know they have a long way to go, and so do we. We have to work together. That is really, really important. The way that our organizations represent equity and ultimately diversity is critical to how our communities do it.
Thank you. So this next question sounds like it's from a business owner. What actions can I take as a business to support ADI and support diversity in my community and in the park?
Great question.
This is really, I don't see someone else jumping. I'm not sure I'm the best person here to answer this, but you can go to the diversityadk.org website. You can sign up. We are helping team people up. Nikki, our director, is interested and willing to help you connect with trainers and others to help you look at yourself. One of the things, for example, our organization and others are going through or looking to do are do audits to better understand where we are, what we can do. Making statements is relatively easy. It's taking actions that are really important. And I noticed a question from a Chris about other models of diversity. And I think this goes straight to that. Yes, there are other places that have embraced this, that have brought in more diversity to their communities and have realized how much it helps economically, how much it helps socially, how much it helps with the arts, how much it helps with vibrancy. And importing information from those communities into the Adirondacks so people see this as a positive opportunity versus a threat is something that we hope at ADI we can be more effective at making happen.
So first, and I want to echo a lot of what Willie said, but I want to start by saying thanks for asking for how to get engaged. I mean, that's the first step. So being aware of ADI and then not just saying, oh yeah, I've seen this thing and following us online, but saying, how can I be part of this? So when we talked earlier about the choir, yeah, we recognized there was a choir, but our goal is to grow the choir. And so if you're asking to come and be part of the choir, that's fantastic. The other things that you can do, not in addition to what Willie mentioned about, come to our website, see what we're doing, reach out to Nikki, find out how you can be engaged. The other thing is you can be look at ways in which you can introduce ADI or the ideas that we stand behind into your community. Look for places where you can be the ambassador to asking to engage in questions and explorations and the analysis that Willie was talking about in your community. That's also a very important role that anybody can play, is to be an advocate and an ambassador for these kinds of conversations. As Pete was mentioning, they may be hard and they may be uncomfortable. But it's time to have these conversations, and we need people to help create the place for those conversations to start.
All right. Next question, if you're ready. Please speak about the Adirondacks' hidden diversity in the prisons. How does the North Country move beyond the prison industrial complex economy?
That is very, go ahead, Willie.
Go ahead, Pete.
Oh, Pete, I was going to say, you should go first on this, please.
I come from the perspective of teaching in the prisons, and that's a tremendously difficult problem. I think that at base, we have to begin to understand racism and inequity in its true light. I think that sometimes people react to the idea of racism as a judgment about an individual. May or may not be the case, but it's the structural racism. It's the way that our larger social systems work that is really the issue. The prisons are emblematic of that. And I'm encouraged and heartened by the recent, in the last few years, move toward prison reform. But we have obviously a long way to go, and that's an issue that's far beyond the scope of the Adirondacks. Within the Adirondacks, one of the things we can do right away, I think, or what we can do better, is to recognize that the inequity and pain and difficulty of our prison world is here in the park, and we can move towards helping people who want to come here to see their loved ones, want to be able to visit, feel safe and comfortable doing so. And there are people who are working on that. Martha can speak to that. So that's important. And beyond that, I think that we have to be part of a larger struggle to address inequity as we see it and continue to push for a reform model, and because of the things that have happened recently to move that direction, I think we have an opening and an opportunity, but we have a long way to go, and it's a difficult problem.
I'll add a little bit to that. As I said at the start, the organization I founded, and when I moved up here in 1997, that summer, the state legislature had just voted to approve, it was something like $78 million to build a maximum security prison. And it was slated to go in the park. And when I moved here in that fall and that winter, it was excruciatingly painful to watch in the press Adirondack towns, small Adirondack towns, vying to have a maximum security prison, which is cruelty by design. A maximum security prison where people are locked up for 23 hours a day is cruelty and inhumanity by design. And who ends up in those prisons because of the Rockefeller drug laws and disproportionate policing and sentencing and so forth, it's primarily, in our region, primarily men of color, primarily African-American men. And so to see these towns vying to have a prison, when I think I've worked in the prisons as a teacher, I visited friends, in prison, it's not a day in the park for anybody, right? So we need to, one, acknowledge the reality that there is this historical but unrecognized and exploited and often terribly mistreated diverse population in the Adirondacks right now. And as Pete said, their families and friends, loved ones who come to visit. For people coming to visit a loved one in a prison, especially the friends and folks I've talked to, especially if you're a person of color, it is not a pleasant, welcoming experience by any stretch of the imagination. So for us to start to, as I said earlier, for me, diversity is about justice, right? And so if we begin to identify and not turn away from this really painful reality that's part of our diversity mission, right? Inclusion and welcoming mission. And if we listen to downstate neighbors, people most impacted by the system, and also to people here in the North Country whose livelihoods depend on working in the prison. I think it's really important that we do that. And I think that, you know, next week, I think, is the 14th or 15th annual Common Ground Alliance gathering, right? I think we need to insert this question of what kind of economy do we want our communities to depend on? Do we want our communities to be engaged with? What do we want our young people to aspire to as career and occupation? I think we need to insert this question of reimagining the North Country economy as a rights-based, sustainable economy for all New Yorkers. So it's a really fundamental conversation, and the economic jobs, careers, has to be a part of it.
Very good. So the next question is a little bit about assessing our success. How do we measure what success looks like for the objectives of the ADI? So any thoughts on how we're going to measure that?
And there's a whole number of measures of success. But I would also say that to some degree, let me start by saying it's a fair question because it's a difficult question to actually measure. It's kind of like marketing. Do you know if your marketing efforts are hitting the audience? Do you know are they being effective? And to some degree, a lack of conversation doesn't necessarily mean there's a lack of a problem. And we've seen that obviously for generations. So people would tell you like, oh, there's no racial tensions in the Adirondacks. There's no diversity problem in the Adirondacks. That doesn't mean that was correct. So how do we measure success? We won't necessarily know, but there are certain things that we can look at. And one of those is we know that people reach out and ask friends, is it safe in your community? Or where should I go? I'm coming up for the summer with my biracial, son or nephew or niece. And they want to know where they can have an experience where they're not going to be singled out or where they're not going to be at the receiving end of something horrible. Those are real questions we get. We often get circumstances where people will come in to the Adirondack Interpretive Center and they will be clearly uncomfortable that they're the only individuals that look like them. We've had individuals from a variety of different countries and nationalities. And, beginning to see more and more individuals in the park that make the park represent our state. I think that will begin to be a measure of success. When we see the traveling and the seasonal homeowners and the year-round residents, when we see the demographics begin to shift to more represent than demographics of the state, that will be a huge measure of success. I also think when we begin to see a decrease in the kinds of incidents that happened in Saranac Lake and elsewhere, even here in Newcomb, we've had some circumstances that have been uncomfortable in recent weeks. When we see those diminish, but at the same time, when they do arise, that we see an even stronger, even more vocal resistance to those kinds of activities. That there isn't a hesitation on anybody's anybody in a position of leadership, there's any hesitation in their response. They don't need to be asked to step up and to state how they resist and resent that kind of activity happen in their community. There will be a clear and immediate rejection of this kind of activities, of these kinds of circumstances. So all of those are measures of success, but they're hard to actually quantify. So it's a difficult question to put a pin on and say, well, when we see 20% increase in this and a 30% decrease in that, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we have, detailed metrics for what success looks like. But I can tell you, obviously, that as we see the representation of who's in the park as a visitor, as a seasonal homeowner, as a year-round resident, that will really be an indicator of success to me, among others.
And I go back to my point about schools. I think a great measure of success will be one if we are able to create an education, provide an education for students coming through Adirondack schools, both public, private, what have you, that includes a robust, interwoven education in which they get to explore the world, develop cultural competence, recognize and appreciate beautiful, profound differences that we have. I think that would be a great measure of success. If we have school boards and school districts one after another signing on and saying, yes, I want my teachers to have this kind of training and this kind of orientation, and I for sure want my students to graduate with this competence, with these competencies, I should say.
Absolutely.
I also just briefly want to throw in, because I think it's important. AI is not just about these conversations. It is an organization that has a business plan that was developed by a Fulbright scholar and an expert in race and public policy. It has a strategic plan that is evolving at the hands of our director. The plan is smart. Her strategy is smart. Our core team is weighing in, and those specific parts of our plans are measurable in one way or the other, not always in a quantifiable way, but in a qualitative way. We're not just talking about stuff and trying things. It's a very organized effort, and we're going to follow the progress of programs, and the ones that work will be measured, and we'll do them better. We'll grow those opportunities, and we'll continue to be smart about it. I mean, we're taking this as a serious, formal matter, and those measurements are part of what we have to do.
Very good. Next question. What advice would you give to park residents who may have adverse feelings to becoming more inclusive and welcoming due to perceptions that this might lead to greater overuse and tourism issues?
Oh.
Billy's got his hand up. You want us to take the first?
This actually goes also to the point of success. The Adirondack Park is a world-renowned, successful example of an area being managed of public and private lands where nature thrives, and I would say most communities thrive. On average, the economy for communities in the park is stronger than it is outside. It's not as strong as it should be, and more needs to be done. So we have a degree of success and international standing. We have an opportunity to achieve that with regard to diversity and welcomingness, and we don't have that yet. The park is big enough that while there are places overused, from Old Forge to Lake George up to the high peaks, there are many other places that need the visitation, need the money. With the right investment in rangers and management and education, we could have twice as many people, and it wouldn't be overuse if it was well managed. So the solution on the overuse issue is one of management and education, helping people prepare. That can be addressed so the park can be welcoming for more, and actually making sure wilderness is accessible for all, regardless of race, religion, or anything else, is an important part of what many people want to make sure happens in the Adirondack Park. I'll just close out this part by saying, we will know success if there is a racist incident, if something goes up that shouldn't in the park, we don't have to wait a couple days for someone to say something. That anyone who sees it in the park, visitor or resident, denounces that. If there is a Black Lives demonstration, everyone who can be there gets there to talk about building a stronger park. If someone's in charge of an organization or an employee of an organization, when they say, wow, we ought to do an audit, when people go to diversityadk.org and sign up, and we see the majority of people doing that, then we'll know we're actually headed in the right direction. It will take time. We have hundreds of years of racism. We have to remember this land was someone else's before people came from Europe. The issues go way back, but we have an opportunity now with all the attention to actually address these twin crises of racism that exist, that are amplified by COVID-19, climate change, the economic strains that just amplify the racist crisis. So I'm encouraged that people coming together now about this. I'll pass that back. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want.
Sorry. Apologize. When I put on another hat that I wear, I'm a wilderness advocate in an organization that's often shoulder to shoulder with the Adirondack Council on protecting this natural resource, which is a paramount thing. And I'm just going to go on the record and say I want more people here. I want people to enjoy this park and appreciate it. I want our businesses and communities like Newcomb and Indian Lake and Blue Mountain Lake, where I am right now, to have more customers. I want everyone to feel that this park is something that they have an investment in, whether they visit or not. I don't buy the idea that there's any reason to say to anyone, for any reason, we don't want you here or we're going to limit. It's a world-class park, and I know Willie will agree with me when I say that it needs world-class management. And world-class management sometimes means you have to protect the resource in places where it's getting too much use or trails getting degraded. But it doesn't mean, world-class management should never mean, we're going to say, you know, this is too much. We don't want visitors. You know, being around this park all the time, we ain't close to that. We are on the Cascade Trail once in a while, a little overused, I will say, but we're not close to that yet. And we don't want to be. We want everyone to engage with this wilderness, with this place, to be customers in our communities and residents in our communities and have their children in our schools. And then the real vision of this park will be fulfilled, and we can still protect the wilderness and do all of that.
I want to add something that gets to Pete's earlier comments about discomfort. This question, and I don't mean this individual that specifically asked this question, but this question is one that comes up a lot, and I often perceive it as a veiled way of trying to identify who's okay to come and who's not okay to come to the Adirondacks. So this question of, well, you know, if other people come, not defining who other people are, but if other people come, they're going to really degrade the park. They're going to overuse it. And, you know, the shoes that you wear and the tread that you have no bearing on what God you believe in, what color your skin is, what country you come from, what language you laugh in. And so I just want to be very clear that I think the question of diversity has to be absolutely rigorously separated from the question of use and management. It doesn't matter. We need to welcome, as Pete said, everybody to this park. And that is independent from independent from managing the park appropriately for those people who come. But but having more people in the park is not a question of diversity in the context of should we or shouldn't we have more people in the park. I also want to share that that Nikki, those of you may have seen that Nikki's joined us sort of as a silent partner, but she's also shared a couple of measures of success that we may have failed. Part of the work that she's doing, as Pete mentioned, that we have a business plan, we have goals, and we're advancing on those goals. Several of them are building communication systems and building groups and connectivities and networks. And one of those is to look at training and building a network of 100 dialogue facilitators, individuals who are going to be qualified and competent and confident to go into communities and to host conversations about diversity and about inclusion and equity and justice. And so we are looking for people to join us. So to the question of, you know, what can I do? This is a role that people can join us and become facilitators, go through our training and become facilitators. We're also looking at developing a youth and parent advisory advisory councils. We're looking at trying to build, actually there's already a network that, that with Nikki's leadership and a fantastic student from Keene Valley, a young college student who grew up in Keene Valley, she's come back as a college student, is looking at putting together a conversation amongst high school students in the park about diversity, equity, and justice. These kinds of connections and these kinds of activities, as they grow and as they bring in more students and as they have actions that they move forward on their own, those are also measures of success of what ADI will be accomplishing. And I know we have a few more minutes, so I'd love to get some more questions if we can.
Yes, one came in thanking Martha for the comment on diversity education within the schools. So speaks to what you were just emphasizing, Paul. It's sort of a two-part question here. So is the ADI developing programs to present to to area school boards? And since we do not have much diversity in our communities, this seems like a critical introduction to our students. Additionally, will the strategic plan become available on the ADI website?
I
So
want to say something,
I
but
can
I
jump
don't
into
know,
the
not
strategic
necessarily.
plan,
Sorry.
which is just to say, yes, it will. So it's undergoing a revision. We've had one, but it's getting a substantial change and a lot more specificity. And that work has to be reviewed by the team, but it will be posted publicly. In fact, everything that we do will be posted and clear. It's very important to have that openness in what we do. So.
I want to make a plug for a direction that where ADI using its combined energy and influence and Nikki's leadership, her direction, especially again as a teacher in the area of education. If you look at in recent years, various really troubling incidents have happened on a number of the college campuses around the Adirondacks. And as a response, I believe that state ed and perhaps even Governor Cuomo required college campuses to come up with a diversity plan, with a convening body, with people who were going to be empowered, but also held accountable to be attending in a very real, authentic, genuine, meaningful way to helping work with their campus communities. I would like us to think about that expectation and that requirement of K through 12 districts, that we're the pipeline for these campuses. The kids who land on the SUNY Plattsburgh or the Paul Smith campus might be a student who was in my classroom for years, right? There are kids. And I think that if we can connect that pipeline between K-12 and 13-16 with a commitment, expectations, and accountability measures, that we really are working, as Paul was saying again earlier, from the youngest ages with our kids in becoming confident in their competence. Not confident in their arrogance, but confident in their competence. So that's on my plug.
Good plug.
Well, we are coming close to 7 o'clock, so I want to make sure I leave myself some time for some closing remarks, if everyone's okay with that. I want to mention too, I know we spoke about how businesses can get involved and support the work of ADI, and the affiliate program is still under development, but more information will be available soon for businesses that want to, and organizations that want to become affiliate members of ADI. So again, another way to get involved and step up and take action. Our website, again, I think we've mentioned it, but I want to emphasize diversityadk.org. There is a donate button on that website. There's an events calendar on that website. There's profiles of all of our core team members and our executive director, Nikki. I want to thank Anka, who's been a tremendous partner of the ADI and a tremendous partner for Nikki personally. You can also consider donating to ADI through Anka or the ADK Foundation. And please jump in, anyone else, if I'm speaking incorrectly. I also want to plug the upcoming sessions. So as Paul mentioned, you know, our capacity is growing and we are building curriculum, train the trainer opportunities, and doing this virtual series that you are participating in tonight. So we've got some more stuff coming up this month. Next week on Wednesday, July 15th, how to talk to your children about race in America. So please tune into the website to see how you can register for that. On Monday, July 20th, what does it mean to be a white male anti-racist accomplice? And some of our members of the core team will be on that panel as well as others. And then Thursday, July 23rd, we have part 1 of Driving While Black. Monday, July 27th, the white female anti-racist accomplices will speak truth to power. And finally, on Thursday, July 30th, we'll have part 2 of Driving While Black. So fantastic content coming and more to come in August as well. So I want to thank everybody for participating and your questions and your attention. And I want to thank the panelists again for your time and leadership of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Have a good
for hosting.
Sure.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. And Kim, thank you for hosting Adirondack Experience. Thank you for your leadership behind this conversation.
Night all. Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Back to work.
Back to work.
All right.